Welcome to the Get Out Swim podcast, where we discuss all aspects of competitive swimming. I'm Seamus T. Quinn, and I'm a former Division I swimmer and current college and age group swim coach. Today, I'm joined by head coach of Hamilton College men's and women's swimming and diving, John Geissinger. John is in his 7th season at Hamilton. Since joining back in May of 2017, John and his men's and women's programs have experienced a wealth of growth and success. Just last season, the men's team had their highest team finish in 7 years at the NESCAC Championships, while the women had their highest team finish in 12 years. Additionally, Hamilton fielded 5 NCAA All-American swimmers last season, highlighted by Sam Karlson's 7th place finish in the 100 freestyle. Prior to joining Hamilton, John was the head coach and aquatics director at Arcadia University. While at Arcadia, John oversaw 120 new school records and guided his team to improve its standing in the Middle Atlantic Conference each of his last 3 seasons. John began his college coaching career at Washington and Lee University, where he helped the women's team capture 3 conference championships and mentor 19 NCAA Division III championship qualifiers. In our conversation, John discusses his early connection with the water, being around his dad, who was an avid sailor, and growing up in a swimming family. John talks about his recruiting experience and what attracted him to land and ultimately succeed at Denison University. He talks about his unconventional journey to explore being a college swim coach and some of the early lessons learned that help inform his coaching today. What I admire most about John is his belief in fostering an environment where his student athletes can reach their full potential and be themselves. John is a student of the sport, an open-minded leader, and one who is confident in continuing to build Hamilton swim and dive programs into a conference and national contender. So without further ado, enjoy my conversation with John Geissinger. Welcome to another episode of the Get Out Swim podcast. I'm your host, Seamus T. Quinn, and today I'm joined by head coach of men's and women's swimming and diving at Hamilton College, John Geissinger. So, John, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Seamus. Privileged to be here.
Great. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, so, I want to say I'm super stoked to be doing this and just kind of going around the NESCAC, continuing to go around the NESCAC and sort of hear more stories of these really just formidable coaches that are leading their men's and women's program. And so I know that right now you have kind of been in the first few weeks here of the NESCAC season. So just tell me where you're at in terms of sort of assessing this first few weeks. How do you feel like your Hamilton program has kind of done these first few weeks of training?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. We're in week 4, because the NESCAC starts slightly later than the rest of the Division III conference. And last season we didn't have a pool on campus, and so there was no opportunity for our athletes to swim in the preseason. So aerobically, we're in better shape just because they were able to swim before October 22nd. We have a really great group of first years. The seniors have done a great job, I think, of welcoming them and kind of showing them the ropes. And so all's going really well. As you know, from your time, right before November, professors like to get in a few sneaky midterms. And so we're in that academic grind right now of managing that balance. And we open our first competition this Sunday in a double dual meet. We're hosting Colby and Trinity. So that'll be a really nice kind of feedback on where our athletes are in terms of the physical, the mental, and kind of the technical stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And so going back to you having to sort of work around not having a pool last year as the new pool was being renovated, how did you work that out? Did you have to rent pool space out at a nearby college, or how did you manage sort of that time away from the Hamilton pool?
So we weren't able to do anything in the preseason for them because that would be like a NESCAC violation, right? We would be giving them an improper benefit, if you will. And so some students, signed up to local YMCAs and would drive 30 minutes to swim for an hour and just to feel the water. I actually called up, Todd DeSorbo at UVA because my brother swam there. And I asked him, I said, what would you do, if this was happening to you with your athletes? And he just kind of and the way that he only can, kind of laughed and said, just get them stronger, right? Like just tell them to get stronger. You'll be surprised at how much impact that makes. And so we switched to lifting 4 days a week in the fall, of course, voluntarily. And I think that was empowering for our student athletes and our swimmers in particular. And then when we got back in the water, we trained at Utica College, and their head coach was a Hamilton alum, and Utica and Hamilton work a lot together, kind of sharing facilities when needed. And so they were really gracious. We just had to work around their times. And so we would have a 6 a.m. practice every day, Monday through Friday, and then either like a 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock evening practice. And so it's definitely different, but in some ways it was nice because they had to get on a bus and drive 20 minutes to get to practice. And there was no running late from office hours, right? You kind of were there. And so I think the focus was at a really high level. And it gave us a really cool opportunity to experiment, because I was definitely stuck in that dogmatic, doubles being super important, and volume being this measurement, right, of yardage, where we couldn't do that. And so we used last year as a kind of a test case on what's really important. And the results, I think, showed us that, the doubles were actually kind of hindering us, at least here at Hamilton, right? Because our student athletes will stay up late in the night working on assignments, and they're so type A that they'll show up to a 6 a.m. practice after going to bed at 3 a.m. And right by the end of the week, they would be shredded before. Whereas last year, the environment was high, the engagement was high. And I think I calculated it, like maybe we'd lose 3,860 strokes, right, on average without doubles. And so they make the other strokes that much more efficient, right, that much more purposeful. And, for the women, the 200 freestyle relay got 12th in the country last year. We broke a school record by 2 seconds in that event. We had 2 first-year women get 9th and 10th respectively in the 1,000. We had a young man go best time in the mile. So the distance was clicking, and our speed was faster. And so I maybe it was an aberration. We'll see this year, because we're continuing with it. Even with our new pool, we're not doing double swims during the academic year. We'll add in some doubles over winter break when they don't have those other stressors. But I just kind of believe that, stress is both physiological, it can be emotional, the academic stress, and we have to kind of consider that as we're putting forth the training. That might be different, say, than like a club coach or at another university, right, where there isn't those same levels of stress.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just that silver lining of not sort of having the pool accessible last year and getting away from the norm and kind of going on a bus, going to Utica, experimenting with lifting in the preseason. All of that's really cool to me, because it also shows me like the importance of connections within the swimming world. Like, you were able to reach out to Todd DeSorbo, sort of get some of his input, and then also, have the connection with the Hamilton alum at Utica, just like use these kind of like small world connections, and then, experiment with the training and different looks. And I find that really cool. And especially with the point about, kind of moving away from doubles. So do you implement any sort of morning lifts, or just take away sort of that double look in general?
Yeah, that's true. And the swimmers always give me a hard time that I don't consider lifting to be counted as a double, but we do lift 3 times a week in season. And so our practice schedule, Sundays is usually our day off, right? We have a meet this Sunday, so that's a little unique. But, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we'll have team lifts in the morning before the classes start. And we break those up by gender. And then we also run like some additional dry land, but we're talking about an hour at most in those morning times. And so they're still only waking up. The lifts start either at 7 or 8, depending on the day and what our strength coach can do. And then Tuesday, Thursday morning, they're sleeping in, recovering. We'll run afternoon workouts Monday through Friday, and then Saturday we'll have the morning practices then 7 to 9 and 9 to 11, and the Monday through Friday practices are obviously co-ed and juggling around class schedules and availability and 7 p.m. exams and all that. But then Saturday we can have the women's team and the men's team respectively together. So that's where we've really tried to build some esprit de corps, with each group, because we are not unique, but the NESCAC conference, there's a women's championship meet, right? And then a men's championship meet. And so we need to have some really good bonds within each kind of unit, if you will. And then we can also do stuff like relay exchanges and things that make a difference. If, Jade Mathias is swimming in, she's a great, women's sprinter, but, going 23.8 is a lot different than going 21.8 in terms of stroke rate and speed.
Yeah, no doubt. And is it really nice just to like, can you say it's just like super nice again to have this renovated Hamilton pool? Like, what has it meant to sort of be back at Hamilton in this newly renovated pool and sort of, just have like this excitement around this new look and sort of like new vibe to the pool space?
Yeah, and again, I think it's interesting because you said the silver linings of, I think adversity can develop grit, right? And that can be a really powerful thing. Because I remember we got to Bowdoin, which is a beautiful facility, right? But we didn't have blocks like all season, and then when we got into the new pool, our blocks were wobbly. So the Bowdoin block, and they fixed them; they're fixed now. But the Bowdoin blocks, our swimmers were coming up like, "Coach, I feel like a rocket," diving into this pool, and they were just used to dealing with challenges because sometimes the chemicals would be off at Utica. And so we couldn't swim that day, right? Or we'd have to drive to another pool that's 86 degrees and adapt training. So we were just used to adapting. And now with this new facility, it allows, I think, for the student athletes to have an easier life, right? It's easier for them. They have, track start wedges, the lighting's gorgeous. We have Bluetooth speakers. And so we're able to really, I think, focus on the environment. And again, that's something that I've learned throughout my coaching career. When I was young, it was all about the workout, right? It was just like, okay, like this has to be super specific and we need to, progressive overload, right? And linear periodization, all the buzzwords that I'm sure you've heard and other coaches talk about. And the more that I've seen, I think it's about like belief, connection with your athletes and their ability to have fun. Right. Because at the end of the day, sport should be about joy. And I think swimming is a very, very challenging sport. And sometimes we think about it in a way where we put all of our eggs in this one basket, right, at the end of the year. And a swimmer and a diver, right, judges their whole season based on 3 days. And that kind of seems like sad, right? Like, oh, like you were either successful or unsuccessful because of 50 seconds. That happened at a given time. And so we've really tried to shift that mindset to, be present in the pool, enjoy the journey and do everything you can, right, to give yourself the best opportunity. But it's my goal that all of our athletes feel accomplished and feel successful, the night before the big meet. And then they can just sort of unwrap the presents, so to speak, of all the work that they've done. And I think that that's been a shift for me in the recent years because we grow, right? We're all human. We're not perfect. And we kind of have to evolve with our swimmers and with the teams that we have, but also with how we do things.
Yeah. A lot of good points in there. I think going back to your point, it made me think about just how that, again, we're talking about the silver linings of last year and your team to kind of develop that just like grit sort of mentality and then see it's like a form of drag almost in the sense where it's like, I don't know, the like less, I would say, fortune maybe in terms of like the pool and the blocks and the certain like elements that sort of add to the, I guess, aura of swimming or like the speed that we can produce in swimming. And then once you get to a place like Bowdoin where you have these maybe nicer blocks or just like a bit of a nicer facility, it's like, oh my God, I feel so fast. So it's like, it's almost like a form of like drag in a way. Like I think like, oh, you take off, the aqua socks or whatever you're using. And then you're like, oh my God, I feel so fast. So for some reason, I just like made that connection. And I think there's something to be said about that. And then also just, your point about as a coach, the importance of creating the environment. I know in one of my last podcasts with Coach George Kennedy, that was a point that just like stuck out in my mind. He was like, as a coach, it's like your job to create the environment for your athletes to, enjoy themselves, succeed, and And I think that that's kind of like what you're getting at there is we can, kind of produce practices and certain looks for our swimmers. But unless we've really created an environment where they're happy to be on the pool deck every day, like there's just going to be too much stress involved, like too much pressure riding on that last meet. And then it's like, well, what is it for? Right. Like if you maybe don't reach those times that you have in mind, like, it's not like the season is a waste. We just went through all these hours spent together and a year's worth or a season's worth of like, what you would like to be is just great memories, a great overall experience. It's a big part of your college experience signing up for, a swim and dive team. So I think that's great. And sort of kind of circling back, I want to take us back to sort of like the beginning of your journey in swimming, as I'm just super interested to learn more about it. So yeah, tell us about, your background in the sport of swimming, kind of what led you to start swimming, and when did you realize you wanted to swim at the college level?
Yeah. So my dad's an avid sailor, right? Like still is and was when we were younger. I think that we were on a boat sailing probably when we were a few weeks old, a few months old, depending on when we were born. And so my mom was really afraid, obviously, of us being on the water. And so we got into swim lessons, I'm guessing pretty young. And, that then turned into, as we kept up with the swim lessons and we may have shown some either proficiency in it, right? But then we moved to Connecticut. I grew up in Darien and there was summer league swimming. And so we were at Norotan Yacht Club was the place where my dad kept his boat. And we didn't have a pool. We swam in the ocean, like from dock to dock. And that's where we would train, just in the water. And it was freezing and I didn't really like it, but the meets were fun. And it was really cool to kind of, hang out with your teammates. And so then that led right to, oh, you should sign up to club swimming. And I think that for me, I played all different types of sports growing up like we all did. And wasn't as proficient at them. It was my hand-eye coordination. I remember one year in 7th or 8th grade, actually, I didn't swim because I wanted to play the other sports. And after a season of sitting on the bench with basketball, I was like, okay, like I think I should go back to swimming. But the thing that I really, as a young person, as a swimmer, you can kind of control a lot more, right? Like in lacrosse and soccer, in basketball, I had such kind of almost a paralysis that I was going to miss a pass or I was going to let my teammates down. And then in practice with swimming, you can kind of really control your controllables and put a lot in. And I was very shy. I was very, very shy as a young person. And so it allowed me, I think, to kind of develop self-confidence and self-worth, throughout the grind of practice. And I was blessed with really great coaches who taught me a lot. And, why I wanted to swim in college is because it just kind of was like my spot, right? Like I loved my teammates. I really felt that my coaches were huge mentors to me. I went to a boarding school in New Jersey, Lawrenceville. And so, from September to, June, I was there, with my team, and we play water polo in the fall, and we'd swim in the winter. And I really was fortunate. Jim Jordan was the high school coach there. He was actually a Williams swimmer from, decades ago. And he just had great perspective. And it was never about like winning, it was just kind of about being the best version of yourself. And so I think that in some ways I got addicted, to that chase, to that feeling. And again, like we showed proficiency for it. My younger brother, he swam, like I mentioned earlier, he swam at University of Virginia. And then my sister actually swam at a NESCAC school at Bates College. And so we all kind of had it in our lives to some degree. And it was just something that I think, really connected us all, which was neat. But so, yeah, and it's funny, I actually told a story, not to get off track here, to the team, right? When I went to Denison, all I wanted to do was go 45 in the 100 free. Like that was my goal. I was 46.8, and my freshman year, I was really like lucky or fortunate to go 45.9, right? In the 100 free at NCAA's. So then you set a new goal, right? Then you set a new goal, and then you set a new goal. And you have to be careful, because when I was telling the team about this earlier this week, at the end of my senior year, I felt like a disappointment. 43 wasn't good enough. Going 42 on the relay wasn't fast enough, because comparison, right, can sometimes be the thief of joy, and I was just saying, okay, I didn't win. We got second, or we only did this. And I was talking to the team about it, because it's like, if my 15-year-old self could have spoken to me in that moment in March, he would have said, wow, like you've accomplished so much. You should be so happy. But instead, it took me some time to kind of come to grips with it, because I felt like I didn't do enough. And that's, I think, sometimes it's easy to fall into when you're in like highly competitive environment, or a quote unquote high pressure environment, where the margins are what they are, and you have to kind of be careful with that. And especially, I think, as coaches, we have to be careful with that.
Yeah, definitely. To that last point, I think, the faster you get, the higher your expectation kind of inevitably can become, right? And so I can totally relate to that. I think, you set that initial goal, maybe as you kind of transition into college. Okay, this is what I have in mind as far as my 100 free goal or my 100 back goal. And then as soon as you surpass that expectation, and maybe it's early on for some of us, that expectation becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it's like, well, it's not a failure if you don't meet that. I mean, it's like you playing that comparison game. Like a lot of swimmers do this. I used to do this. I was like, okay, where was I at last year at this dual meet? Where was I at 2 years before in this dual meet? And it's okay to do that, but it can be a dangerous game, because then, you're constantly comparing versions of yourself year to year, and you're questioning, well, why wasn't I faster, or why was I slower? And it's like, that's okay. That's not the point, right? Like, the point is to see, okay, are you improving on certain aspects of your swimming from yesterday, from a week ago, from the year before, right? Like, are you trying to be a better version of yourself year to year, day by day, however you want to break it down, and like take the times aside from that. Like, it's okay. Swimming is a sport where you're not gonna, progress in sort of this linear way every time. So I like that point right there about you kind of addressing the team in that manner, using your own anecdote as a swimmer at Denison, for sure. Well, cool. And then off that point about being a swimmer at Denison and sort of landing at Denison, was Division III kind of the route that you were really solely kind of focused in on when you were going through that recruiting process, or were you also kind of expanding out to Division I schools? Like, how did you ultimately land at Denison?
Yeah. I mean, I think that 16 to 17-year-old high schoolers, we make really interesting decisions, right? And we have like some, especially now as a coach on the other end. And I remember being that person. And so, as the recruiting process started up, right? Like your junior year ends, and you say, okay, like I'm fast enough to possibly swim at the next level. And so, being in New England and New Jersey, like Rutgers, was recruiting me for a bit. I visited Duke, Colgate. I looked at Middlebury and Hamilton. Actually visited Hamilton and met with a former coach. It's funny, the same couches were here pre-renovation that I sat on in 2004. So I'm glad that we're getting new ones. And so I was doing that, and then I remember, because I was definitely fixated on Division I. Like, that was something that, whether it was for status or, because that happens a lot, right? You wanted to say, hey, I'm good at this, and I want to go swim at that level. But so we looked at the NCAA results, and, a school close to Denison, Kenyon, right, had been winning multiple national championships, this huge string. And so my dad said, hey, let's go take a trip out to Ohio. And I said, okay, we'll visit Kenyon. He's like, you should visit, let's visit Denison too. And we'll visit Ohio University. So we had 3 schools that we were going to check out. And I loved all the visits. It was great. But I really, when I met with Coach Greg Perini at Denison, I just was impressed at how little he was selling, if that makes sense. He was just kind of telling me about the program, showing me the science of kind of the physiology of what they would take me through. He told me that as a sprinter, I'd never have to swim in the morning, which I was like really excited about. And then sophomore year, we started swimming in the morning, so that is what it is. But I kind of, at the end of the day, thought about what happens if, because I would ski, like I was a big skier too. What happens if I blew out my knee, or, I got into a car accident and I tore my labrum to a point where I couldn't swim anymore? How can I make my decision that's based on like the educational and environment, right? Overall, with swimming being a really big piece. And so ultimately it was my, I think, connection with Greg. I remember he told me when I was leaving in the summer, he said, hey, like, you're gonna have a lot of opportunities, a lot of options, but this is a really good one, and so like keep in touch. And that was it. Like that was kind of it. And I went along my way, and through a lot of self-reflection, I really wanted to be a part of a team that could upset maybe, right, the perennial champions. Cause I kind of, and we didn't win at nationals. My senior year, we were able to capture a conference title, which was really gratifying, for the team, I think, and certainly a credit to the coaches for getting us to that point. But yeah, so Denison was a fit for me academically. I like the campus, right? As silly as it sounds, I really loved the campus layout, and I really believed that going there, I'd have an opportunity to develop into what I thought could be the best version of myself. And they had a sophomore on the team, or no, freshman maybe, when I was applying, who was like pretty fast in the 50. And I wanted to train with fast swimmers. And so I thought that would be a really great fit. And I was fortunate to apply ED1. I was accepted. And that's how I chose Denison. But the recruiting process was it wasn't linear, right? Like I had many number one choices throughout, if that makes sense. And I think I was lucky that it worked out the way it did, because when I look back, Denison was a perfect fit for me, and Greg was a great mentor for me, both in the water, certainly taught me a lot in the water, but he also helped me a lot, I think, as a young man.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I feel like a good message for athletes that are going through the recruiting process today, even if I think back to my own experience too, and certainly with your experience, is like just having open-mindedness when it comes to the recruiting process. Like, unless you really, really know, okay, I'm a top level swimmer, I want to go to a Division I school, or, maybe staying in state and going to a Division III school financially, and just, for certain variables makes sense for me. But if you're sort of in this gray area where you're not sure, just be open-minded. Like there are options at Division I, at Division II, and at Division III. And like for you, in your case, you had all these different options, and certain colleges that peaked as your number one choice. But ultimately, once you took that trip to Denison and you connected with Coach Greg, it was like, hey, this is a place where I think I could really be the best version of myself. And certainly that worked out.
Yeah.
So very cool. And just like, tell me about your time, just like as a student athlete at Denison. Like you had tremendous success. I remember just reading up a couple of days ago on sort of, more about your swimming. And I was like, oh my God, this guy was a stud. He was, 22-time All-American at Denison, was part of countless record-breaking swims and relays, and, just like national runner-ups, national titles. So yeah, just like what worked for you so well?
I think, and the coaches were great. The team, I remember, like I mentioned earlier, I went to a boarding school, but I was still nervous when I got to campus. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm 10 hours from home. Like, how do you make friends again? Like, how does this work? And I'll never forget the seniors of the team my freshman year, like knocking on my door and saying, hey, do you want to play ultimate Frisbee? Like, out in the quad, and just this feeling of, again, community and acceptance. And so that became really important to me. And I always wanted to do my best for my teammates, because they were just so important in my life. And then again, I think Greg is like a swimming genius, and one of the best coaches in the country. And so I just would bother him a lot, asking him about like how to swim the 100. And, he was very clear, and he said something to me once that's true. Right. And he said, I could make you a faster 50 freestyler, but then your 100 and your 200 will suffer. Right. And we're doing enough work so that you can score, right, in 7 events, at the national level. And so I had a ton of belief in him. If he told me to swim with a brick attached to me, I would have done it. Like I would just do it, and so I think that helps. That makes it a lot easier when you have inherent belief that what you're doing is going to work. But it wasn't always easy. Like I remember my freshman year, you'll get a kick out of this, I think. I did a lot of threshold work, right? And, pink, red, blue. But so a set that we would do a lot was like 2100s, right? 2100s freestyle, and it was on 120. That was like the slowest interval on the team. And I couldn't do it. Like I couldn't do 2100s on 120. And, fast forward to senior year, I could do 2100s on like 105, right? So there was development, but I distinctly remember a meeting where I went to his office freshman fall, and I said, like, Coach, I'm not doing well. Like I'm last on every test set. Like I can barely survive practice. And he just looked at me and he said, well, here's the good news. Like you only have to do one at a meet, right? So just keep moving, let your heart keep going and don't get discouraged. And that was really important because I was, again, 18 years old, terrified. Like people are kind of making comments like, wow, Geissinger, like you're so slow in practice. And I just couldn't, I didn't have the base yet, I guess. But the team, the environment, and then I think that every year, I didn't know if I was going to make it back to nationals, right? Like I never took anything for granted. And, Greg did a good job with that too, in a team meeting saying, hey, like there are no All-Americans here, right? There are no record holders here. Like we're starting fresh. And so I think that I was able to keep like a real hunger, right, to improve and a real desire to improve. And, I was fortunate to be in the right environment. Like I would look up at the record board at Aaron Cole's records and just be inspired and say, okay, like maybe I can get that fast. Like maybe I can do that. And I was fortunate to have David Curtis on my team, who won all these 200 freestyle national championships. And we were roommates my last 2 years. And we viewed the sport somewhat differently. But at the end of the day, we wanted our team to be the best. And it was really gratifying and certainly one of the most formative years of my life. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. It sounds like, certainly there's different things to touch on within what you just said, but like certainly your connection with Greg, starting from that, recruiting process all the way through college, it seems like you guys built a really good relationship and you trusted him, and he was someone who was, just a good leader and someone who, gave you the tools to be able to, really achieve the success that you did. And like that story about the 21s, him being like, well, you only need to do one when it comes to the race. That definitely had me laugh because, I think that's something that, certain coaches will say to you, and it sounds silly, but it is true. And I think, you need that sometimes. So, and then certainly like the environment, like you said, surrounding yourself with, just swimmers that are, that are determined to achieve, just personal bests and achieve things that are bigger than just themselves too, like as a team. And certainly with having like that fresh perspective at each year, like there are no All-Americans. I think that's great because the success that Denison, like a perennial powerhouse like Denison or Kenyon has year after year after year, that can kind of maybe rub off if it's not sort of like said, hey, this is a new year. This is a new look. Like nothing is given. So I love that. I think that's great. So transitioning to coaching, like what was it, about just coaching or swimming? Like how did you basically make the decision, I want to coach? When was that like sort of a realization for you? Like, hey, I want to coach. And what was it even more so about like staying in Division III?
Yeah. So, Division III, I think's phenomenal because it gives the student athletes agency, right? I trained every summer. Like it was hugely important to me. It was one of the biggest parts of my life. This summer before my senior year, my brother was going to UVA. And so I contacted Mark Bernardino, who's now at NC State, but he was the longtime head coach at UVA. And I said, hey, like, can I come down and train with you all? And they were really gracious and let me swim with them. And I got to swim with, 132, 200 freestylers. And so, but that was my choice, right? There was no no coach telling me to do that. It was just kind of, hey, like here's your opportunity. And so Division III always holds a really, really strong place in my heart because of my experience and just because of, I think, the philosophy. Whereas, my brother, who had an incredible experience, but they were telling him when to take certain classes, right? Because, hey, like that economics class might be kind of challenging during NCAAs. And so it's just a different dynamic, not better or worse, but different dynamic. The decision to coach was a long one. I actually got my first job a few months after college. It was 2009. And I was working as a Nielsen research person for IMG Media in New York City. So I would pull up the ratings and data for Monday Night Football, and I would pull up what Australian Open got versus Wimbledon because we were in a contract negotiation with ESPN. And so I worked with the executive vice presidents as like their research assistant, basically. And it was kind of almost like a glorified internship, to be honest. But I would, wear the suit every day and go to work. But there was definitely some calling that I felt like I wasn't maybe doing what I really wanted to do. And I was doing what I thought, society or I don't know, my family wanted me to do. And so through lots of conversations with my parents and Greg, right, he asked me, he's like, hey, you're never going to be rich, right? And I said, yeah, no, I get it. He's like, all right, just making sure. An opportunity at Washington and Lee opened up for an assistant coach position. And, Greg sent me a Facebook message because Facebook was really big back then and said, hey, I threw your name out there because I know you've been thinking about this, right? Throughout that year in New York City where I'm living and working and doing all that. And I think they honestly just interviewed me as the third or fourth choice. I had no real coaching experience beyond, summer swimming for a few weeks here and there coaching. But as we talked about, I was fortunate to have a good swimming career. And sometimes that can get you into the doors, right, so to speak. And I went down, I met with the coaches, and I distinctly remember, I can't remember the building's name, but we had a student section, right, where there was 10 current students at Washington and Lee, and they were just interviewing me, asking me questions about my philosophies, how I'd be as an assistant. And for the first time in months, right, I felt alive. I felt like this is where I should be. And so I got back to New York City. I just got a promotion right at my job in New York City. So I was now more full-time and I was on this track. My boss couldn't believe that I was leaving to become an assistant D3 swim coach. I remember he said, what's your end goal? Being the head coach at Ohio State? That's it, And I was like, you know what? I'm just doing what I'm doing. And I who knows, I may be back. Right. And so I started my coaching career at Washington and Lee, and it was, again, very formative. Cammie Gardner, who was Cammie Matthews as a swimmer, she swam at Kenyon, and talk about a stellar career. I think she was a 27-time All-American at Kenyon. The only time she wasn't an All-American was because the relay got DQ'd. And so she was great because Greg Perini swam at Kenyon as well under Jim Steen. So they kind of had the same language. And so I was able to come in and really be like, okay, I understand what you're trying to do. And she was really empowering to me as a young assistant, where she gave me kind of almost control over the sprinters. And so I was able to focus on a group, make mistakes, do taper plans. And it was really nice. And I'll also get my beak wet with recruiting and navigating that. But so she was really instrumental. And if she hadn't been the head coach there, who knows if I'd still be coaching, because I just think she was really important for me, transitioning from a swimmer, right, into someone who's now in the coaching world, because it can be pretty unforgiving sometimes. And she did a good job of creating an environment where I always felt seen, heard, and kind of a part of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Very, very interesting. So you took the route of kind of transitioning out of college, getting a full-time job in a space that made sense for you, but ultimately you just weren't having that gratification at the end of the day. This isn't, fulfilling what I think that I'm capable of. And so ultimately that led to the transition back to swimming. And that's cool. Just like keeping that connection with Greg and sort of, just having that, just kind of communication and advice and him putting in a word, at Washington and Lee, that's all just like really powerful stuff. I think for the fact of just like maintaining good relationships, and having someone like that can, be a voice to just, bounce ideas off or ask for, advice, whatever it is. I think that's phenomenal. And that's just like, it sounds like sort of like an ideal start in Division III, working just under such an accomplished swimmer in her own right, with an environment that allowed you to kind of just, I would say, segue into the coach and explore different things within coaching that sort of, I don't know, just allowed you to grow in that space as opposed to your time as a swimmer. And so, yeah, what was it about like Washington Lee and those kind of, couple seasons that you had there as an assistant coach? What would you say were like some learning experiences, and just like looking back in retrospect, what were some things that, you kind of learned quickly or maybe not so quickly, that kind of helped inform your coaching like today?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, we were fortunate, as a different environment, say, than the NESCAC, where, WNL's in the ODAC. And so as a conference, it wasn't as competitive for them. Like WNL's top 25, top 20. I think one year we might have finished 15th on the men's side at NCAA's. And so there's incredibly fast swimmers there, but it was always trying to get over that hump when I was there. And they've done incredible in the years since of building up that women's team, building up the men's team. I know they had a 4-amer at nationals last year, but one of the big lessons I learned was you just never know what's going to happen in coaching, right? Like, you could think everything's set up, and then for factors that are completely out of the coach's control, it's different. My last year there, we had recruited 3 women, and this was in like 2012 or 13. There was like a 5,700 flyer. She only swam high school. There was a 221 200 breaststroker, and then there was a 157 200 freestyler. And we were just, as coaches, like, yeah, we're going to be awesome, right? Like, this is it. We've turned the corner. And then for, a myriad of reasons, all 3 of them didn't stick with it, and they were done by October, November. And, Cammie took it really hard. I took it really hard. But then we kind of had to realize pretty quickly, like, well, they're gone, right? Like, they don't, and we need to focus on the student athletes that are still here. And that was something that, like, shocked me, because it was like, hey, we recruited you, and I thought that this is what you wanted. And it was my first taste, maybe, especially at that high academic environment, where, like, did you always care about swimming? Or was this something that you wanted because you thought it was going to help in some way with the application process? But it made me just, again, be really grounded in that you never know what's going to come up. Something bad's probably going to happen once a week. Bad in your mind, right? Something disruptive, and you can't let it change who you are or what you're working towards, because, again, we're surrounded by really great students who deserve our best, right? And so that's something that, again, in the moment, was super challenging. I remember being bummed, like, really, really bummed about it, because I was already, it's September, and we're like, oh, we're going to break this school record. We're going to break this school record. We're going to break this, I was already kind of having the season before the season started. And then, because of just individual decisions, which were completely fine, right? You respect their decisions. All that planning was just gone. And that's something that I think about, because, this year on paper for our Hamilton team, we have some really fast first years on paper. They haven't swum a meet yet. They haven't gone to NESCACs yet. And so you got to be careful not to count your chickens, right, so to speak, before the eggs hatch.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that another great point, especially valuable for someone like me, who's a young coach who is planning on continuing to coach, either at the club or collegiate level. And I think that there are certain things within your first few years that you just naturally are going to learn. And that is definitely that point about, the unpredictability of, what swimmers are going to be like, or, how they're going to develop under your program. Like, that all is valuable insight, because often I would find myself like taking things personally at the end of the day. Like, at the end of the day with coaching, it's all human connection, and you're working with young athletes, you're working with young developing adults. And so there's a lot of times where you can, if you allow it, things will become personal to you, and you will, sort of like think about those things and harp on those things at the end of the day. And I like that point. I just about it, like, sort of having patience and knowing, like, okay, not everything is going to be in my control, or what I may think will happen based off of the recruiting class I'm bringing in, and the times and the development that they've had from their freshman year to senior year. Like, it might not work out that way. And I have to see this as a day-to-day process of getting to know the athletes, seeing how they train, watching their strokes, and just getting to know them and like working with them. So I think that's great. Very cool. And then talk to me about the transition from being that, first time assistant coach to then getting this head coaching opportunity. I mean, I feel like in some ways, I mean, that's kind of like an early transition to go from being an assistant coach to then taking the reins as a head coach at Arcadia. So yeah, what was it about like that position opening up, and then just like that transition? Talk to me about that transition from now being an assistant to, just managing this team.
Yeah. So again, like loved working with Cami, and could have kept working with Cami for many years. But I just felt like I was ready for a change, right? To chase something new, for better or for worse. And so I did the thing where you're on NCAA market, and you're looking at jobs, and it was a program that never had a full-time head coach before. And so it was this really unique opportunity, I thought, where I could not have to worry about stepping on any old traditions, or dealing with the culture that existed. Because it's hard, right? When you come in and there's an existing culture and you have to try to change it, that's really challenging. That there really was no culture. And so I was able to go in and kind of instill what I thought at the time, right? Probably wouldn't do the same stuff then that we, I would have changed some things for sure with hindsight, but it was really exciting for me. And I remember I didn't even see the office, that I was going to be in. I barely saw the pool. I was just looking in. But, again, I went to boarding school in New Jersey. It was right near Philadelphia. It was going to be a little bit closer to my family. And so everything kind of lined up. I really enjoyed the athletic director. I'm really big on relationships. And so like the conversation with him, he had come from Stevens Institute of Technology, where Coach Trevor, I never can say his last, but Trevor, who's now at NYU, had done incredible things. And so he was talking, he knew enough about swimming where I was like, okay, cool. Like he gets this, and we're going to win national championships, right? Like that's kind of what you think going into it. So, again, very fortunate that they chose me to be the head coach there. And I was there for 4 years, and it was, again, very, very, very educational, in terms of managing a group. And we went, my first year there, I think we had 8 guys, maybe. We only had 8 guys and about 10 or 11 women. So we were barely in, a team that met the threshold for being a team, right? But based on NCAA rules. And so I'd be going to open houses and just saying, oh, like, you play tennis, but you also like swimming, like, come on down, and so we had a hodgepodge of athletes. But what was unique there, and something that I miss a little bit, was that every single person felt an incredible role on the team, right? Every single man and woman was like, this, like, I need to get second in this 2 fly, because I'm the only person in the event. And as we grew, because we grew pretty rapidly, to where when I left, I want to say we might have had 50 plus members on the team. That roster management piece I wasn't good enough at yet, I think. And so there was members of the team who were showing up to the practice. They were grinding, right? They were doing everything I asked, but they weren't getting the same shine, right? As it was in the first few years, where that was taking care of itself. And that was something that, I'm glad I learned, because I think we're getting better at it here. We're making sure that, yes, like you may not be on the A relay, right, but your contributions to this team are, immeasurable. And we were able to set, I think it was like over 100 school records in that time. Again, like it was a new program, so we were able to, the data was great. But at my last year, I think we lost the championship by like 50 or 70 points. We ended up getting third. And it was cool. Like it was really hard to leave, because, and I still talk with some of those, swimmers. Like I actually was talking to one of them like 3 weeks ago. He called me asking some advice, not even related to coaching, right? Just about life, and, because he just wanted to connect. And I think that, it'll always definitely hold a special place in my heart, because we did some really cool things. Like I said, I wish, we'd have made some different decisions in some spaces, and I think we would have been better, but we were all learning kind of on the fly. And yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. I mean, to be able to take a program from 8 men, 11 women, or 12 women, and then to grow it to like a 50-person roster, and just, like you said, the data kind of can speak for itself, the stats can speak for itself, but just like to be able to grow that team into like a formidable team, and have each person really have a role, and then also try and navigate, like, as the roster grew, like trying to find a role for everyone, and trying to, as another coach said on a podcast, like be everything to everyone, which is honestly the hard part about being in a coaching position, especially when you are the head coach. That seemed like a challenge that you had to kind of grapple with, but then ultimately it helps inform your coaching today at Hamilton. So that's really cool. And then, like, were there any what I call like aha moments where and it could have been either at Washington and Lee, kind of building from some of the things that you learned there, at Arcadia, where you were like, okay, this is something that can really help just make me a better coach, like moving on? Were there any moments that were like, okay, this is a perspective switch for me?
Totally. I mean, totally. And I think, at Hamilton, we're really blessed. We have a full-time assistant. At Arcadia, when I started there was just, a stipend. There were no assistants. And so, it was kind of lonely at times, right? Like dealing with all this stuff just in my own head. But one moment, that I remember just vividly, and, so for that conference, there were qualifying times to swim at the conference meet, right? You had to hit a time to swim at the conference, and they weren't prohibitive. Like the women's 500 free might have been like 6 minutes, right? Or 6:05, but it was just enough so that, there was a standard. And so that was a big goal, right? It's like, hey, we want everyone to go to conference. We want everyone to make these times. And we had a young woman who was, from the shore in New Jersey, and hard worker, strong, but didn't have the most proficient stroke, right? Like and she was going to try to make it in the 100 breast. And I think her best time was 1:22, that season, and she needed to go 1:17. And so we going to drop taper her, right, the best you can in a 6-lane pool, middle of January, and suit her up for a dual meet. And to my embarrassment, like in my head, I was like, there's no way, she's going to hit this, right? Like we already had a midseason meet. There's no way, like, but we're going to give it a shot. And, of course, we get to the meet, the whole team is behind her lane and everyone's amped, and she pops off like a 1:16 flat, just against all physics, against everything that I knew about swimming. And so I like that aha moment was one. I was like, okay, like maybe I don't know as much as I think, right? Like as you get older, you have to be humble and realize that we don't know everything. And two, like never underestimate the power of will and team. And it was just this really cool moment where I said, I was like, I'm never going to doubt that something can happen again, because I saw something that in my opinion wasn't possible, right? Like it didn't make any sense. And it was really, I think, powerful for the team and for that individual, but also for me, because it really shifted my perspective, and I think changed how I interact with student athletes, because at the end of the day, like we're there for them, right? Like, this isn't like, we had our time. And sometimes I think that certain coaches can get too egotistical, right? Or too caught up in their own, like, this is about me. And it's no. Like, we're here as a tool. And again, this is something that I got from Greg, where he said that, by the end of the season, you should not need me anymore, right? Like, and he told this story of, timing and feeling like there's a stopwatch, but that was the goal, right? And I remember with Sam Karlson, she graduated last year. She was a 3-time All-American, did incredible stuff. We'd be at NCAAs and I would just be standing there like, need anything? She's like, nope, I'm good. And there's that little ego check where it's like, oh, cool. Like, so I just need to get the meals then and drive you around. But you remind yourself, cool, like I've done a good enough job of communicating and empowering that she's calm, she's confident. And, that's truly where the best performances come from. So I really go back to, again, that aha moment, at Arcadia, where, don't doubt your athletes. And also just kind of be there to support them, because they're going to surprise you, if given the opportunity.
Yeah, such a great point. And I think even like that aha moment of, again, not doubting that athlete and what they're capable of kind of ties in with the Washington and Lee point, where you were like, don't expect to know how things are going to play out, like sort of the unpredictability of certain things that kind of ties together. And yeah, certainly, I think you made a great point too, to just about, as a coach, like, if your mindset is, this is for me, like, this coaching, venture that I'm on, wherever I'm at, like all these performances that my swimmers are achieving, or NCAA records or whatever, like, if that's just boosting my ego and it's all for me, and it's really not a gratification of their performance and of their achievements, then that's just, I think, the wrong mindset to be in, because then you're going to be someone who isn't ultimately, taking pride in what, like, your athletes are achieving, and you being, again, like a tool, and a big tool at that, to help them accomplish those things. And great point about Sam, being at like NCAAs or at like a NESCAC Championships, and you coming up to her and her being just, completely just like confident in what she's doing and her race preparation. That's I think that's the mark of someone who's given their swimmers the tools to be comfortable doing what they're doing. So that's great. And then, like, moving on from Arcadia, like, what attracted you to Hamilton College? I guess, what kind of, was there anything about the school that surprised you, or like the team or community within those first couple of years? But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if we were filming then or not, I visited Hamilton as a prospective student athlete, and so I had it kind of in the periphery of my adolescent mind. It's just that coach never called me back, after I left campus. And so, the recruiting process just didn't get off the ground. And so I knew of it as a really strong academic institution, where I thought, okay, like, I'm going to be able to attract, I thought, like, really strong student athletes. And, when you look at the top 10 NCAA Division III programs, like, they're all really strong academic institutions, right? And so I said, okay, like, it's a member of the NESCAC. I kind of know about this. My sister went there, and if I didn't like it or they didn't like me, no harm, no foul. I have a job at Arcadia that I really love. And so I submitted my information. And again, I think that when I got to campus, I thought the campus was gorgeous. The student athletes were really hungry to improve. They really wanted to be prideful about all the work that they were putting in. And the athletic director was a real straight shooter. I really enjoy him. He's still my athletic director now. And he actually was a Hamilton alum from the 80s. And that's when, Coach McDonald, Hamilton was pumping out All-Americans in the 70s, 80s, and Coach Thompson took over in the 90s. And I think in 2000, and I believe Adam Hoyt, the Tufts head coach, was on that team. They got second at NESCACs, their first year in NESCACs, to Williams by 50 points. And so I knew of this really strong history that existed. And then from, I remember Maggie Rosenbaum when I was at WNL winning back-to-back national titles at Hamilton. And it was just going to be about building up the team, right? Like we had strong individuals because it's a great school, and you're going to get those athletes, but can we get enough to kind of make, to be disruptive, if that makes sense, to the conference standings. And so I was excited for the challenge because, I think something about how I view things, and this is, again, true to Denison, true to WNL, true to Arcadia, and I hope eventually true at Hamilton, is you want to leave it better than you found it, right? Like, and that's kind of how I measure my own success and like my own days. Like, have I made an impact and left it better than I found it? And so at Denison, the year before I arrived, the men got like 6 at nationals. We got second twice and third twice. So, we kind of left it better than we found it. At WNL, I think we built some good cultural stuff. At Arcadia, we covered. And now at Hamilton, the men got 9th at NESCACs last year. The women got 7th at NESCACs last year. We've had, All-Americans and academic All-Americans. And so some of our standards are always, we're competitive, right, as coaches. And so, again, we have our own little score sheet that we keep that you can't get too addicted to. But in our preseason meeting, it's like, hey, the women got 3 relay B cuts last year. Can we get 4, right? Can we get 4? The men, you had an individual qualify last year. Can we get a relay, right? Can we just have one more thing? And that allows you to be in this highly competitive environment, because you can't be disappointed, if you go a best time and you get 25th and don't get to swim at night. Like, again, how silly would that be? And so we really try to message that and have our athletes really believe it, so that they can be proud of their efforts, and we can have that measure. And that's, again, the objective nature of our sport. It's really fantastic. And that's a gift that we have as coaches in this venue that, lacrosse coach may not have the same way of viewing it.
Yeah, definitely. And like, again, another point that sort of ties into your, I guess, message to the team about your own anecdote as a swimmer at Denison, like not, setting too high of expectations, from a team standpoint, right? Like comparatively to your individual standpoint of sort of having that disappointment by senior year because you were looking to, just achieve faster times. Like that 43 or that 42, as fast as that is, wasn't enough. And now similarly on the team side, that message to me sounds like, hey, we got 3 relays to have B cuts. We're going to go for 4. Like, it's not the jump to like, oh my God, let's win the conference. Like, getting 7th is an accomplishment. I again, being in the NESCAC conference, it's the deepest conference in all of Division III, right? Like, it is so competitive. And so to kind of just keep making your way up and keep kind of making those improvements, I think is a great message to have for that team. And certainly you're in it and you're doing it right now. So that's awesome. I wanted to ask, like, is there something you do within your training that's like a game changer for your athletes in your eyes? And I know you alluded to sort of taking away from the doubles, maybe adding more strength and conditioning, but is there anything you can expand upon there that you are like a firm believer in?
That's a great question, and I think one answer is I hope I'm not a firm believer in anything, right? We want to be questioning and growing and changing. And the challenging part, I think, about coaching swimming is just the different disciplines, right? You have some athletes who are going to be swimming for 16 to 18 minutes, right? They're going to have to be at a certain speed requirement for that distance. Then we have other athletes, especially in the NESCAC, when there's 50s of stroke, they may not swim anything over 50 seconds. And so you're exponentially increasing the duration of time for a very small percentage of your athletes. And then the majority, right, are very much speed and power focused. And so I'd say that one thing that I think's helped us is we've really pushed the speed part, right? The return on investment of power and speed development, because, and this was something I got from a track coach at WNL, actually. They would use the pool they would put like aqua jogging belts on and they jog, right, to recover. And so I think I had to be there as a lifeguard, right? So I'm sitting there, just sitting next to him, and I say, hey, like, so, like, why do you not run as many laps? Like, why is it so different? And he said to me, he's like, hey, by the time I get these men, these women, aerobically, they're kind of almost maxed out, right? They've done a lot of endurance training, and I need to get them faster to run a faster 800, right? To run a faster half mile, because if our max speed can increase, right? And so for swimming, let's say that I'm a 50 freestyle at 21.5, and I can improve that to 21.2. It stands to reason now that I can take my 100 out faster than I did before, easier than I did before, and I'll have the back half energy to kind of close a race. And so, again, going back with the doubles, you know, our yardage might be low. Our yardage is definitely lower than it was when I got here. You know, in terms of what we track, I think yardage isn't what we should track. You should track the duration of time that someone's doing something. Because if you were on a football field and you closed your eyes and you walked 100 yards, your body has no concept of what 100 yards is. That's like a human construct. It'd be like, oh, Seamus, your heart rate was at 140 for about 30 seconds, right? And so we all track yardage because that's like the way that we talk, you know, with coaches and with swimmers, and the dogma that exists in our head. But sometimes I think that we need to focus more on, again, like the duration of time, the speed that we're going at that, and then the technical aspects. And again, because that's stuff I've learned from Arcadia. You know, if we were swimming in September and October, right, without the NESCAC rules, we would just do drills. You know, for 2 months, we would just try to get better at swimming, because so often I'd be at a championship meet, and I think all of us can relate to this, and their hearts are pumping blood a little bit better, right? Their lungs are transporting the oxygen a little bit better, but their turns are still the same. They're still having the same technical flaws. And we as coaches expect them to be better, but technique is there's a certain point where that frontal drag, you can't escape it. You know, so no matter how much you bench, how many hundreds you do at 115, that's great. You're really good at swimming 6,000 yards in practice, but unfortunately at NESCACs, that doesn't matter. You know, it's how fast can you go a 500? How fast can you do a 200? And so I think that we've shifted really in the last 2 years to focusing more on that and trying to innovate a little bit, so that we can try to overcome not some advantages that other teams have, but the hierarchy that currently exists, right? And you know, like when you're recruiting, you know, student athletes, and there's a list that they go through, and if some schools are saying yes, that's it. That's the end of the conversation. And so we have to be, I think, a little bit, again, innovative and different if we're going to try to get a different result than what we've been getting, you know, for the last decade.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love it. I love everything you're saying. I think, again, so many great points. Probably too many to even unpack, but I would say, yeah, like, I like your open-mindedness, it sounds like, to just not holding very like rigidly to maybe some of that like swimming dogma, if you want to call it, that we have, like tracking yardage and tracking certain variables that really it's like, well, why are we tracking this? Because I like that point about if you walk 100 yards with your eyes closed, well, how will you know if you won't really be able to tell like when that 100 yards will come up. So I think to me, it makes sense that you're more trying to just do the swimming with intention and not look at it as a metric of how many yards did I do, but like, what did I get out of this workout, right? Like, were we able to work on technique within our stroke, or were we able to, point out one thing where it was, okay, we were able to preserve speed really well in the set and just like kind of do things that way with intention and with a different thought, as opposed to, okay, how many yards did I grind out today? How many, whatever, what was my heart rate throughout this entire set? And that stuff is also interesting. I know as swimmers, like, we like to have those metrics. Like, a lot of people are like number oriented people. They like to have that, but at the same time, it shouldn't be the sole focus. And so, yeah, I mean, so many great points. I like that. And just like preserving speed, I think that's been a huge thing that I've learned recently. Like, how can we reach that next level and not just be sort of in its aerobic threshold, sort of like cycle week after week after week after week? How can we actually reach the next level where we can go as fast as we can in 100 freestyle or 500 freestyle? And certainly, yeah, all that stuff is great. I'm kind of curious, like, do you think that the NESCAC, there's all this talk about just adding in more tech suit, training or, racing. And so I've listened to other podcasts where, especially the Division I level, that's a huge talking point. So do you think we'll start to see that in the NESCAC? And are you someone who is kind of open-minded to throwing on tech suits more in training or even in a dual meet? Like, I'm kind of curious to see, because I know we are Division III, but NESCAC is really, really competitive at the end of the day. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're so expensive. And so that's where with tech suits, right, there's just this reality of, okay, it's for a woman, it might be $600, $700, a man, $300 to $400. And you want to preserve and be inclusive, right, of all the student athletes that you have, because one athlete might be able to have 6 tech suits, no problem. And another has to work a summer job to be able to get a tech suit for the year. And so that's where I just get so nervous about using them, honestly. So we'll use different equipment, right, resistance-based stuff or things to get people up at speed or over speed, so the central nervous system can activate a little faster, right, which I'm guessing is what the tech suits are doing for these athletes in practice, having their hips slightly higher. It's kind of like 2 flies in dual meets. Should we do them? Like, it's such a different race. They're just exhausted. Their technique goes crazy, but there's definitely value in it. What I think is interesting with the NESCAC conference is you're seeing a lot more teams go to midseason meets and swim fast. And that's something that's really shifted in my 7 years here at Hamilton. And, Tufts obviously goes to the MIT Invitational, and, Bates, Colby, and Bowdoin have their main invite. Middlebury is going to go on an invite that we're going to be at. There's a Connecticut Cup, that Con, Trinity, and Wesleyan. And I do believe that coaches are now more willing to say, okay, let's give a day or two to see where we're at. And for me, I just think it's more fun to swim fast, to be honest, right? And as an athlete, we all remember what it was like, right? Where, if you're a 200 freestyler, some 200 freestylers, like I could barely break 150, and I was going 138 at the end of the year, and so that's a huge gap. And luckily, like I said, I had a lot of faith in the process, but I think for a lot of athletes, they don't give you that faith very quickly. And so it's nice to have that carrot, if you will, or that feedback of, hey, let's go fast in December. And then you can go fast again in February. And then honestly, you can go faster in March too. Like, we don't have to, I think, hold it hostage, if you will, like it used to be in the past, right? Like, oh, you can't double taper, or, you're resting too much. Gretchen Walsh just went 20.79 in the 50 free at the Tennessee Invite, and it 4:38 in the 5 free for, leading time for the UVA women. And I just think that the sport's changing. And again, it's so recent and new. And so who knows what's right exactly, but I'm a big believer in you learn more swimming fast. And to your point about, like, Arizona State only swims in tech suits now in dual meets. That's it. And it makes sense because, yeah, the 100 fly will be very different. The 200 breast will be very different in that suit. And then they're able to make these micro adjustments that have exponential gains, right? And that's, I think, what we're all toying with, but the budgets are where, tech suits, unfortunately, have a little bit limit on them.
Yeah, great point about that, and the accessibility and affordability for tech suits. I kind of didn't even keep that in mind. Someone reminded me that the other day, because I was asking them, they're like, "You do know those are like $400," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's so true." Like, I've been so out of the tech suit, sort of like, just the tech suit world that I forget, And I guess as a Division I swimmer myself, like, we were kind of given a tech suit come the championship meet, so. It wasn't like an extra expense that we needed to account for. Whereas in Division III, like, there isn't necessarily a budget for that. So it's like, that's a great point. But also, I think it is fun to swim fast. Like, to your point, I think within our conference, the fact that people are gearing up for these mid-season meets, and you're seeing that shift like throughout your time at Hamilton. I think that says something about sort of just like where we're at with the development of just like the season in the sport, even in Division III. I think gearing up for a mid-season meet, being able to evaluate where your swimmers are at and just kind of let them, kind of go fast and prepare as if it is a championship meet, I think is really exciting. So that's awesome. Where will you guys go for your mid-season meet?
We're going to the Bomber Invitational. So Ithaca College is hosting it. And so it works out great because it's about 2 hours away from campus, because the other thing with these mid-season meets is it's right before finals, right? And so you have to be cognizant, again, of the stress. We actually have 3 men that are going to be missing some sessions because they're in the orchestra, and we're doing the Nutcracker. And so they're going to be in the pit putting on performances Friday and Saturday night. And, there's a lot going on for these athletes. And so that's why you got to kind of find a local midseason meet, especially in our conference, to make it work with the philosophy of what we do.
For sure. Yeah, makes total sense. And very cool. I think that's awesome. That shows the sort of like caliber of student athletes that we're working with. 3 of them have orchestra, and that's so cool. But that's what I love about the NESCAC. That's what I love about these sort of like just like higher caliber academic schools. I mean, these kids are so interesting and they're so fun to work with. That's great. And then as you continue to like foster and grow, the Hamilton Swim and Dive program, like what's your vision for the program? I know we've touched on it a little bit, but are there goals that you just hope to reach with this team moving forward?
Yeah, man, I don't think there's a ceiling. I think that, patience, persistence, perseverance, that's something, my AD tells me all the time, because we'll come back from NESCACs and I'll be, you have those post-meet blues where it's like, oh, if only we had done this, or if only this had happened. And we're better than we were yesterday here. We're not as good as we're going to be tomorrow, I think. And so what that looks like, I hate to kind of put a stamp on it, but I hope that we can be in the conversation to see, win an NESCAC championship as a team, right? Get up there and have individual national champions, relay national champions, and be in the conversation, that mix of the top 5 programs in the country. It's going to take a while, right? We have to build up and keep building up that equity and that trust in the swimming community. But I think that we have made some significant inroads. We were really fortunate. 400 freshman IMer on the team on the men's side, which is going to be great. I think he would have gotten 3rd, maybe or 4th at NESCACs last year. We had a young man go 21 flat in the 50 free in practice with touch pads in last week. So that was really exciting. He's a freshman on the men's side. And so I think that the possibility is always there. But we just kind of want to continue to do the things that we believe that are right, be the best version of ourselves, and again, create an inclusive environment so that when students return 4 years from now, they view this experience as one of the most formative of their lives, right? Because I think that fast swimming is the byproduct of like a healthy lifestyle, right? And, excellence, you can't turn on and off the switch of excellence. Like all of our All-Americans last year had above 3.5 GPAs. Doesn't mean they're the smartest, right, students on the team, but they're probably the most organized, disciplined. They have time management skills, all things that really translate to our sport. And then I think translate to the rest of their lives, I hope. And so I think the future is really bright for our program. I'm really blessed to have, a great team. And we've really worked a lot on building up that trust and culture so that they do feel safe to be extremely vulnerable, right? And go out and not be afraid to fail, because I think that that's the biggest challenge. Again, you mentioned these high academic environments, they're not used to failing. They've excelled at so many things. And sometimes the fear of something, like I saw a quote where, what you want, the thing standing in your way is the thing you're running away from sometimes, right? And how do we, again, create that environment where they're saying, okay, I am going to try that interval, or I am going to try this different event? Because too often we peg hole, just kind of say, hey, you're a sprinter, or you're you're a distance swimmer. It's like, no, you're a swimmer. You can do every event really well, and let's give you opportunities to do that, and let's have fun with it. And yeah, when we get to NESCACs, we have to sit down and say, hey, Seamus, like, you score more here, and so we need you to swim this event. And those are realities of our competitive sport. But I just, I hope that, 10 years from now, right, that we can sit and say, okay, we've continued to learn. We've given ourselves an opportunity to compete. And we don't want anyone in the NESCAC star to shine less bright, if that makes sense. Like, I want every team to keep getting better and better. I just hope our star can continue to grow and be the brightest it can be, during our time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great way to look at it. And yeah, definitely I like that point about I guess trying to, like, I had a swimmer the other day who was trying to work on her dive, and she's a younger swimmer. She's a club swimmer, and she just can't kind of get herself to jump off her lead leg to like go out into her dive. And I'm like, you just gotta, you gotta embrace the fear right now, because, I've worked on it with like probably a couple weeks now, and she's still just going right down. She's getting into her streamline. She's going at a good angle, but she just won't jump. She's too scared. And I think that's a simpler way of putting it, that like, we need to walk towards our fears often. We need to like embrace that and kind of embrace the uncomfortableness of it, because often that's when you see the true development. Like, if you just stay comfortable in what you do as a 500 freestyler, as a 200 freestyler, like, if you do some things just a certain way and it's worked for you for so long and you're so comfortable doing it, well, then ultimately you're not going to be the person that's growing, like, right? Like, you're not going to be reaching that ceiling and or getting close to it at least. And so I think that was a great point that you made there. And so yeah, well, my last question for you is, of course, about I guess the name of the show, the Get Out Swims. So are you a fan of Get Out Swims? And do you have any favorite Get Out Swim story?
Oh yeah, I love them. The only problem is sometimes, right, the late practice, you want to do them and you didn't do it for the first practice. You got to be kind of careful of equity there. But no, my favorite Get Out Swim. And the other thing about Get Out Swims, you really want them to succeed, right? Because there's no worse environment than having a Get Out Swim that doesn't work, if that makes sense, right? That they don't hit. But we were in Florida last year, in Sarasota, and the weather's great. Our flights were canceled, so we have to take a bus down, which still the team was awesome about it. And so we're down there, and we had one. He was a junior. He's one of our senior captains now, Jack G. And he's a really, really proficient butterflyer and IMer. And we're going to have this really tough set that I was excited about. Like, I was really pumped about the set that we're going to do. And he comes up to me before practice, and it was like, we swam in the morning, so it was an afternoon swim. We'd already gotten in a lot of work. He said, Coach, if I break a minute in the 100 breast right now, will you just let us get out? And I looked at him. I was like, he's never swum breaststroke for us. And I said, okay, like, sure, but you need to pick 3 teammates, right? And we'll give them the time. And so we gave them a moment to kind of talk. And again, the whole team lines the pool and they're screaming. And lo and behold, he broke a minute. Other athletes, hit their times, right? Because we calibrated them the right way. But he kind of went up because Matt Charest is our assistant coach, and he was a really strong breaststroker at Bates. And he was like, I'm going to prove you wrong, Matt. I can do this. I am a breaststroker. And it happened. And, once again, right, never doubt the power of belief and will. And I think that what the Get Out Swim gives you is it puts the athletes under a state of pressure, right? And performance that you can't replicate in practice any other way. Like, the stakes are never higher. Like, your teammates' souls are in their hands. You get to save 5,000 yards. And so it really is a great psychological tool. And one that I also think actually gives some really cool team building efforts. So yeah, that's my favorite Get Out Swim story. And we'll probably have more this season too.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. I think, yeah, like, I got goosebumps while you were saying that, in the sense where, yeah, like, the thing about the Get Out Swim is that it does create sort of that, just that environment where it's just, you can't replicate that anywhere else or at any other time in your swimming. It really is its unique sort of own entity. But it allows you to really like step up, like that mentality you got to get into. Cause I've been in get out swims before where you know what's riding on you, kind of hitting that time or hitting that standard. And yeah, it's just, but it really does like build sort of that, I don't know, extra level of grit or whatever sort of word you want to use to describe it. But I think it's great and it does have its place, but you need it to succeed. You have to have it succeed. So you have to. So that's great. Well, John, again, I want to thank you for being on here. It's been absolutely great talking to you. I've loved learning about, just how you approach coaching, your journey throughout swimming as a part of your life. And yeah, if there's anything you'd like to add before we sign off, certainly do so.
No, I mean, thank you so much for this opportunity. Honestly, call anytime. Would love to continue to talk swimming, and thank you for all that you're doing to again bring more awareness to our sport. And really hats off to you. You could become the Bill Simmons of swim podcasting, perhaps.
Yeah, my friend said that the other day, and he was like, "Yeah, what are you gonna? Are we gonna start seeing you on the Ringer now? Like, are they gonna start having you as the swim show?" I was like, "Maybe we'll get there someday."
Yeah, you got a subscriber right here, so that'd be awesome. Fantastic.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate it, and again, I'm just I'm happy to be doing this. I think this absolutely has a place, and we have so many stories within swimming that people can really learn from and appreciate. So. Thank you, and good luck with the remainder of this season for Hamilton swimming and diving. I'll be sure to tune in, and then I'm excited to follow how you guys do. So,
awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Yeah.